We are going to be talking about Gothic literature in this PowerPoint. So let's start off with defining what is Gothic fiction. Gothic fiction began in England in the late 18th, early 19th century. That's the 1700s, early 1800s. And it spread to other parts of the world, especially the United States, pretty quickly. It falls into the realm of what we call romantic literature, where faith in the senses, the feelings, the imagination are emphasized. Great romantic writers that we normally think of, like Byron and Keats and Wordsworth, they focused more on love and affection, adoration, all this stuff. Well, the Gothic literature is darker and more tragic than most of the other romantic works of the period. So some of the famous examples of Gothic literature, we have Dracula by Bram Stoker, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, who was only 19 when she wrote this book that ended up being really one of the most important horror novels of all time. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre is the famous one where Mr. Rochester decides that he doesn't want to be married to a crazy woman anymore, so he locks her in the attic and then romances the nanny, played by Jane Eyre. And yes, it is in fact a romance. The Turn of the Screw, and of course, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. So, if you are familiar with any of these books, what you'll see is there is a absolute rejection of unicorns and rainbows and kittens, and instead a focus on the macabre and the tragic and the love affairs where people are more likely to die or kill each other than live happily ever after. In Gothic fiction, setting is extremely important. It is often set in an old, rundown structure, especially old castles and great country manors. The buildings usually feature hidden passages, trapdoors, dungeons, secret rooms, and is usually no longer a fabulous place, but it has declined, and it's more of a drafty old house that is never warm. The environment is equally important, and this is the area around the setting. The environment reflects a desolate or sinister atmosphere. So we have the dark forests, the imposing mountains, stormy weather, and areas far away from civilization. So, for example, the story of Wuthering Heights takes place on the moors, which is a desolate area where the wrong step and you could end up in a moor that's going to suck you in. It's basically a bog. And, this environment is adding to the tension because it doesn't cooperate. There's no rainbows and sunshine. It's a creepy, dark place. And that, again, adds to the sinister feeling around the story. Atmosphere. Stretch is an atmosphere of mystery, horror, dread. You know something bad is going to happen, so you're waiting for it. The plot often involves hidden secrets which threaten the protagonist or the main character. And it often deals with the supernatural. And this is where we get into the real Gothic sensibilities. Because what we have here is this idea that ghosts and vampires and Frankenstein creatures, people who have multiple personalities exist and are there threatening you. So it is this sense of dread that follows you through the story. And like I said before, the focus is on the morbid or the grotesque. So again, what we see here is this entire construct of a dark, foreboding kind of literature. The characters are usually isolated or alone, and the isolation can come in different forms, physical or emotional, and it could be self-imposed or result of circumstances beyond their control. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you see at the top, that's a picture of Robert De Niro, his version of Frankenstein. And he is a criminal who is brought back to life by Dr. Frankenstein. And he is isolated because he clearly is one in a million, about 10 billion. No one even can conceptualize what it would be like to come back from the dead. So he is extremely alone physically and emotionally. Characters are often under extreme duress. They're very stressed out. And they feature usually a wide-eyed heroine whose innocence is shattered. Now on the right-hand side, in the bottom picture, that's a scene from Turn of the Screw by Henry James. And the young lady is a naive, innocent nanny who comes to look after two children. And the really interesting part of this story is it turns out that she's the crazy one. Because when she starts seeing ghosts and imagining things and thinking that the children are out to get her or somebody's out to get her, what we realize about halfway through the novel or the novella is that, in fact, she's the one who's conjuring all this up in her imagination. So again, what we see here oftentimes is a narrator who you cannot trust, because from their perspective, they're telling you what they see, but are they insane? And that's the question. Emotions tend to run high, so you have these very intense feelings, passion, strong will. They defy others or their own common sense to pursue their own goals. And men tend to storm and rage in reflection of unseen inner torments, keeping in mind that in the late 1700s and 1800s, you didn't see women expressing emotion in quite the same way that you do today. So nobody's going to take off her heels and say, hold these while I take her out. No. So the men tend to be the ones that are hyper emotional. Here's a scene from Dracula. I think this is the Gary Oldman version, where he says, I love you too much to condemn you. Because, of course, if he sucks her blood, she's going to become a vampire like him and be cursed with eternal life. We also tend to see the damsels in distress. It's a woman threatened by a tyrannical man or by the circumstances in which they find themselves. They often appear frightened and may suffer from some kind of ailment. And women are often portrayed as either innocents or seductresses. And again, we go back to the old idea that women, for the most part, prior to the 20th century, were portrayed as either the Mary Madonna, Mother of God, or Jesus, and purity, perfection, or Mary Magdalene, the whore, who is out to seduce men until she is redeemed by the love of a good man. Of course, non-sexually. The atmosphere of foreboding kind of underlines everything that goes on in Gothic literature. Very ominous effects precede dark events, so you see a lot of storms, thunder, lightning, flooding, maybe a couple locusts or two even. Unlucky omens appear, ancient curses linger, especially ancient family curses. Dark forces beyond the hero's control thwart his ambitions. So, again, what you're seeing is this reliance oftentimes on the supernatural. Murders, kidnappings, people going mad, and tragic illnesses are often part of the plot. And of course, what we see oftentimes thematically is imprisonment and isolation. We see the supernatural, ghosts, and unexplained manifestations often appear. And again, these authors were specifically making a choice based on the fascination at the time, which was, at this point, the 1800s. People were fascinated with trying to contact the dead. And so there were all these people out there running around trying to convince others that they could speak to the dead, kind of like the Long Island medium. So, whether you believe it or don't believe it, this was very popular in the 1800s, which is why it appears so often in so many of the Gothic fiction of this day. Sometimes these elements have a rational explanation, which Edgar Allan Poe always tried to rely on, but the implication always suggests something not of this world. So again, even with the raven, knock, knock, knocking on his door, there is still this thought that there is something supernatural around the raven. Lastly, what we do see in terms of the environment is an overall impression of decay. Either the family is dying out, or a community, a country, an individual has peaked, and now they begin the slow process of decline. And this is oftentimes manifested by the environment, where you see a manor house or castle crumbling into ruin, like the picture you see at the bottom of this slide, and in the characters themselves. In the picture of Dorian Gray, a young man looks beautiful and never gets a day older, but in the attic he has a portrait of himself that is aging. And again, you have these wonderful supernatural elements to reinforce this idea of the theme of someone who's isolated because they have no peers. If everyone gets older but you, who do you hang out with when you're an old man because you look 20? So, just some interesting concepts. Love Gothic literature, in case you haven't figured that out. I would highly recommend The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, one of the best ever written. And it's his only novel, so that's even more impressive. If you are interested in some anti-feminist work, Jane Eyre always manages to fit the bill. And of course, a good love story with a tragic ending, then you get yourself some Wuthering Heights. So, have a great day. If you have any questions, please text or email me. Otherwise, I will talk to you all later. Bye.